Once again, thank you for joining us today on Bloomerang Academy, where we are talking about small steps towards sustainability. Joining us today is our training manager, Jenna Rutherford. Thank you so much today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jenna. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks, Diana. Hi, everyone. I am Jenna, and I'm going to share my screen really quick. Give me one moment. All right, you should all be seeing the same slide, so don't worry. It's not a glitch. But yes, like Diana said, I am the training manager here at Bloomerang. So I run our coaching and consulting programs. If you all have watched Academy in the past, you probably know Die Cox. She's our database consultant. She is one of my employees, and I'm so glad to have her on our team. But also, too, before I was the training manager, I was on frontline support. So if you chatted in or called in, you might have worked with me in some capacity. So hopefully you recognize my name from that world back in the day. But I actually graduated from Michigan State, so whoever was from Michigan, howdy, old friend. But I did graduate degrees in communication, PR, and hospitality business. So I actually was an event coordinator before working at Bloomerang, and that was kind of where I found my love for nonprofits, because I would work with them on their fundraising events and other galas, things of that nature. So that's kind of where I discovered the world and immediately tried to move into a role where I was no longer working nights and weekends, which is pretty great, but I also still being able to help nonprofits. So I'm also a dog mom to a Wheaten Terrier named Bowie, after David. And I love yoga and all things food, whether that's cooking or going out to eat at local restaurants. I'm in Broad Ripple, so just north of downtown Indianapolis. We got a ton of different options here. I'm also a Hufflepuff, so I love Harry Potter. My picture is from Harry Potter World before COVID. It was my first time going, and it was a magical and wonderful experience. But in all seriousness, between working in the event industry and my educational background in marketing, PR, and business, I've developed an affinity for merging the day-to-day needs of an organization while still strategically thinking and playing the long game. So sustainability is a large concept, and there's a lot of moving parts and pieces that play into it. But my goal today is going to be to show you a few of these pieces that you can start thinking about and some small steps that you can take to start setting up your organization for long-term success. So please note that I am not a financial advisor, and I am not a nonprofit consultant. But if you do want to dive deeper into your finances or any of the organization's specific efforts, please know that we have a directory full of wonderful consultants that can assist you after this session. And we're going to list that link at the end of the session. You all, of course, will receive the slides as well. So that being said, let's break down today's session. So first, we're going to define sustainability from a nonprofit perspective. Then we're going to dive deeper into donor centricity and think about some ways to improve donor satisfaction with your organization. We're also going to explore a few constituent-based metrics, as well as financial metrics that are going to help you understand where you stand with your donors, as well as your gifts. And finally, we're going to start thinking about some simple steps to help you prepare for the future. So there will be opportunities for a few questions after each of these points in the session. Again, like Diana said, please add any questions to the Q&A area, and we're going to do our best to answer them via chat or during the session. But of course, if we cannot answer them live, we will definitely follow up. All right, so I do have a question for all of you. We're going to have a few of these throughout the session, but ask yourself, are you currently focused on the day-to-day or on the bigger picture? So Diana just threw up the poll here. Feel free to answer that. But in general, I'm not talking about your mission as an organization. What I'm really referring to is when you and your colleagues walk in each day to your organization, are you thinking mostly short-term and what needs to get done that day? Or do you have the bigger picture in mind as you go about your day? So feel free to answer. I'm going to take a sip of water here quick. And Diana, if you'll let me know in a few minutes, just kind of where we stand with that poll.
Thanks, Jenna. It looks like 70% of our respondents are somewhere in between. 16% focus on the day-to-day and 14% focus on the bigger picture. And if you're not able to see the poll, you can also write in your answers in the chat.
Absolutely. Yes, and know too that this is not really an easy question to answer either. So if you're in the day-to-day at this time, that's totally okay. This is a journey, it's not a sprint, so don't think you need to be at that finish line just yet. But the main reason I ask this question is your attitude around this subject really can set the tone for your organization. And this, of course, then can affect organizational culture, plans, and can even drip into constituent loyalty. So that being said, thank you for answering the question. And it was a very interesting answer. I was kind of glad to see it was a little bit higher in that somewhere in between. That means that I'm glad you're here. So hopefully we can give you some good next steps after this session. But let's start with defining sustainability and why it matters. Oh, give me 1 second. There it goes. So really what it's doing is it's helping you to put the pieces into place that are going to set you up to be in existence for many years to come. As a nonprofit, you're focused on making the world a better place. But in order to do this, you need to make sure that your organization can be around for the long haul. So focusing on sustainability as an organization should not only help you in your day-to-day operating efforts, but it should assist you in achieving your long-term mission. But please do not confuse this with self-sufficiency. I'm not saying that your nonprofit is going to be completely set up to be financially sustainable without the assistance of donors or grants or other sources of income. But instead, think of it as building and strengthening pipelines for continued growth and security. So really, it's about setting up your organization for long-term success through your fundraising efforts, your organization's processes, procedures, and constant analysis and adjustment of your efforts. And we're going to be looking more in depth at these specific segments in a bit. So let's take a look at what sustainable organizations look like. So sustainable organizations will prepare for changes in leadership. Nonprofit voluntary turnover rate was around 16%, according to the 2019 Nonprofit HR Talent Retention Survey. Unfortunately, this is really an ugly reality that the industry has to deal with. Having your plans and procedures written down is going to allow you, that next person, to pick up where they left off and not leave your organization hanging during the hiring process. Be aware of their long-term goals and their organizational goals. So know where you want to go as an organization and set goals to help you get there. Again, thinking about long-term plans and goals for your organization can help change the attitude of the organization when it comes to your culture and plans as a whole. They also will give donors what they want. Your donors are helping you in your mission. They've literally bought in, so give them what they deserve. And it's also going to have, or they're also going to hold the board accountable. So board members are fiduciaries who steer organizations towards sustainable futures by adopting sound, ethical, and legal governance and financial management policies, as well as by making sure that the nonprofit has adequate resources to advance its mission. In plain terms, your board is there to help steer you into sustainability. So hold them accountable and keep them engaged. And finally, become financially solvent. You want to make sure that you can keep your lights on and save for a rainy day. Again, this is not going to say that you can, you're going to be able to 100% provide yourself through program feeds, other self-sustaining endeavors, and life is going to happen. So you want to make sure you have a reserve that allows you to weather the storm. So it's going to help you know that you can keep pursuing your mission with more confidence. Any questions thus far? We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions, Diana.
No questions at the moment, but a comment here that I think many of you are in the same boat as well. Jennifer says, my program staff focuses on the day-to-day. As a one-person development department, I'm trying to get all of us to see long-term, but it's like pushing a boulder uphill.
Yes. Yes, that is not uncommon whatsoever.
And I know a lot of you are out there are in the same boat as well. So if you have any advice for each other on how to make this less of a chore, pushing boulders uphill, if you just want to commiserate, let us know.
Yes, we are always here for commiserating as well if needed. It's just a good cathartic release. All right, well, with that, we will move on. I have another question for you all, and this is going to be more of a free-form answer, so feel free to put your answers in the chat. But the question is, who or what is at the center of your fundraising efforts? So taking your mission out of it for a moment, when you are fundraising, Who or what are you putting at the center of your decision making? Diana, let me know when we have a few responses. I'm very intrigued.
So far, we're getting donors and the people we serve.
Yeah.
Someone says we are a campus ministry, so students are at the heart of all decisions. Staff and patients inform fundraising, individual donors, patients' underlying mission, families, community, donors and impact recipients, clients, people we serve, and the admin costs associated with that.
Got it. So from a fundraising perspective, one of the things we want you to really focus in on, and some of you answered this, so good job, is donors. Putting your donors first from your fundraising perspective. Again, from an operational perspective, absolutely be focusing on those people that you're serving and things of that nature for your mission. But when you're fundraising and kind of just like how you approach your fundraising, put it from the donor's perspective. And we call this developing an attitude of donor centricity. So let's take a look at that. So this pyramid here, the donor pyramid, if you've attended a previous academy class, you've probably seen this pyramid, or you may have just seen it in other ways, but let's talk about it. So really at the very bottom here, you've got your universe of prospective donors. So this is going to be anyone who has the potential to give to your organization. And what you want to do is once they donate, they kind of move up this pyramid to being a first-time giver. And again, the goal really is to move them from that prospect level through the pyramid to then hopefully help them make even more of a connection to your organization. And by the end of it, hopefully secure a larger or more consistent gift. So donors are going to play a huge role in your organization's sustainability. They are helping you not only with your day-to-day operations by providing sustaining gifts like you see here, but also too, bigger long-term goals for your organization, or kind of even bettering your organization from a program perspective or things of that nature, the more enabling gifts that you see up here with major giving, planned giving, et cetera. So again, think of your donors like investors in the cause. They want to be a vital part of the mission and not just a commodity you're treating like a dollar sign. So you can also kind of take this pyramid and think about it from a donor lifecycle perspective with your organization. So think about creating key moments in each step. For example, how will you onboard first-time donors to hopefully get them to be a renewal gift donor? What steps will you take that with the next aspect of the pyramid to then hopefully get them to become a consistent donor? And how will you recapture lapsed donors? So try to think of a holistic donor experience that's going to help your bottom line. Make it thoughtful and personal. It doesn't have to be expensive. Just think about maybe who should get emails versus who should get mailings. Who should you put in a more one-on-one approach with? And then think about your own resources and capabilities for each segment of the pyramid as an organization and the type of donor that you're trying to capture. And we're going to kind of look at some of those different ways in the different segments of the pyramid in a little bit with some metrics. Sorry. So really adopt a donor-centric mindset to deepen your relationships with those that are helping to fund your mission. This means focusing on donor needs and creating a unique experience for them in order to strengthen their connection to your organization. Don't forget, it's much more cost-effective to retain an existing donor than to obtain new donors. So how do you keep your donors satisfied? So let's start with the Donor Bill of Rights from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. This is the list of rights focused on how to treat your donors to help them have full confidence in your organization and show them the respect they deserve. So if you haven't looked at this list, I would highly recommend it. You can either Google it, or again, when we send out these slides, it's linked. But some of the key components include openness and transparency. How do you intend to use the gift? And using it strictly for the donor's intent are big ones to focus on here. Receiving appropriate acknowledgments and recognition, professional behavior by those representing the nonprofit, ability to control communication preferences, et cetera. Those are just a few. So I would highly recommend taking a look at this if you haven't already, and just kind of evaluate where you stand with these different items as an organization. And then also communicate your impact. Communicating your impact to your donors really show them that their investment in your organization is making a meaningful difference. Measure your program's impacts and communicate this to them. We're going to talk about, again, this a little bit more later, but also segment your donors and tailor your communications. Connect the best types of communications for those donor segments. Think about outreach in response to action or non-action, so what they've been doing with your organization, and to make sure that your organization is, or your donors, is receiving the appropriate touch points at the appropriate times. But also too, don't forget about other constituents. So again, we focus a lot on donors because that is a part of your sustainability efforts, but at the same time, those volunteers, your board members if you're a membership organization, staff, in-kind donors, sponsors, et cetera, the list goes on and on. Most of these ideas can also be applied to them as well to keep them engaged with your organization. So craft your messaging to them, make it about what they care about, things of that nature. And last but not least, open the lines of communication. Relationships are a two-way street. So solicit for feedback for ways to improve from their perspective. And with Bloomerang, we actually offer built-in surveys for new donors, existing donors, and lapsed donors. So again, kind of segmenting it out for you immediately. These are based on the research of Dr. Adrian Sargent, and these surveys are going to allow you to solicit feedback from your donors, providing you with an average score on your donors' feelings towards metrics like trust, commitment, satisfaction, and intimacy. New donors, or those who have given their first gift, we're going to look at trust, commitment, and satisfaction based on 10 research-based questions that are going to provide the donor ability to rate how they feel on a scale of 1 to 7. Existing donors, we actually add in the intimacy metric for them because they've been with your organization. And we ask them a total of 15 research-based questions. So it's similar to the new donor survey in how it's built, but we do add that extra metric in there. And lapsed donors, we are going to ask them point blank why they are no longer donating to your organization. And really, we're going to then show you that response. And hopefully it's going to give you better insight on how they could be recaptured or ways to improve as an organization based on their experience. So if you are a Bloomerang customer, you can access this area within Bloomerang by clicking on the email icon, selecting engagement surveys, and activating the specific surveys you wish to begin sending. We're not going to retroactively send surveys. So once you activate it, that's when we start sending them. So if someone meets the qualifications previously, they won't get one, but the next time they do, they should get one from you. And yeah, it's a pretty cool tool. And of course, too, if you get in there and you're struggling, I always will advocate for our support team. So please reach out to support if you do have any questions once you're in there or a knowledge base. We have some great help articles on this as well. All right, any questions? Again, we probably have time for about 1 or 2, Diana.
Thanks, Jenna. We have a question here. How often should you do engagement surveys?
In regards to Bloomerang, it's going to be more or less for so again, new donor would be right after that first transaction, after you've acknowledged it as well. We don't send it until it's been acknowledged because we don't want to be sending a survey before you've actually thanked the donor. But you would send it, probably about 48 hours after the acknowledgement's been sent. From a existing donor perspective, typically we're going to send it 6 months around that time, we're going to send it after their next gift. But we won't send it again until a ways down the road. So I think it's every 6 months we kind of look at to see when was the last time they gave. So someone like a recurring donor, if it's a monthly giving thing, we're not going to keep sending them surveys. So we look at it about 6 months out. And then your lapsed donor, we look at that based on the retention wheel. So if they gave to your organization during that, we'll look at it in a second, actually, during a 24-month time frame, if they gave to your organization 13 to 24 months ago, but then in the 0 to 12-month range that we're currently in, kind of once they get into that 13th month, that's when we send it. But that being said, these really are parameters up to your organization if you're not using the engagement surveys. So if you guys, want to set parameters, maybe you just want to do it yearly, maybe you want to do it quarterly, things like that, it's totally up to you.
Great. Thanks, Jenna. We have another question from Kristen here. We are new customers and have loads of lapsed donors. Can we pull information for that historical group?
You sure can. And we're going to actually look at that. So don't worry. We'll be hitting that here soon. All right. So that being said, without further ado, to make sure we can get to that, I got one other poll, but sorry, 1 second. My computer was being weird. how often are we checking the status of our donors' behavior or our financials? So we're actually moving into that question here relatively soon.
Thanks, Jenna. Please let us know if you're checking the status daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, or somewhere in between, or something totally different. Let us know in the chat. It looks like so far monthly is in the lead.
Cool.
We'll give it maybe another 10 seconds and see if that changes.
Is there any neck and neck ties?
Right now it's looking like 43% check that data monthly, and then 17% quarterly, 15% weekly, daily and annually are at 9%.
That makes me very happy.
And we have a comment in the chat of this is still pretty new, so there is not an established or still learning to establish processes.
Well, that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to say next. So really the appropriate time frame is going to be based on your organization's resources and priorities. So again, daily and annually are probably the two that I would say daily is a little overkill. Annually is you really should be probably reconsidering. But from a daily perspective, that might be a little bit overkill. But your weekly, your monthly, your quarterly, and again, you might want to kind of look at different metrics at different timeframes, depending on how important and how your communication plans or things like that are shaping up to be. But again, this is very much based on your resources and your priorities as an organization. But again, the more frequent you can keep a pulse on things and where you stand, the better. But let's take a look at some of these metrics. So to start, retention. But again, these metrics in general are going to help you think through some of the list segmentation ideas like we were discussing earlier, and some specific touch points as well within the donor pyramid from that perspective. But retention, so understanding how many of your donors are retaining year over year, helps you to see your sustainability in action. So working on increasing your retention is going to, of course, in turn, increase your sustainability. And first-time donors. So I don't know if any of you have seen the Academy class in regards to first-time donors, but if you haven't, just know the industry standard right now for first-time donors is around 20%. So could you imagine if you can increase this for your organization to not only add to your regular retention rate, but engage a new donor in your organization to develop that relationship? Be pretty substantial. And LIBUNT, so this is kind of getting into those lapsed donors. They gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. I always love the fact that they included the U. I think that's just super cute. But solicit feedback for these people. Have a conversation. They may not be giving at what you determine to be lapsed, but consider them as an active, but then they still consider themselves as an active donor, but you won't know that until you ask. So try to rekindle that relationship. And last but not least, donor value. Looking at the average gift size of a donor, or either their average gift size or maybe a cumulative giving perspective for your organization to help you determine where they stand with your organization. And this can also help you make decisions on how to move them within the pyramid. So, I'm actually going to demo now a few reports in Bloomerang here. We're going to actually start with the donor retention wheel. So if you are a Bloomerang customer and you've logged in any capacity, you've probably seen this wheel for your organization. So what does it mean? Well, first off, and I'm going to change this here to default. From a default perspective, again, it's what I just explained, where we look at a 24-month period on a rolling calendar year. So based off today's date, going back 24 months. Within that 24-month period, there's two segments. So they've given in a 0 to 12-month range or a 13 to 24-month range. And so from that perspective, if they've only given in that 13 to 24 month range and have not yet given in the 0 to 12, we consider them lapsed. Whereas if they've given in both the 0 to 12 month range and the 13 to 24 month range, then we consider them to be retained. So what's great about this wheel here, and again, this is Bloomerang customers, as soon as you log in, you can kind of play with this. As long as you're an admin user, you can actually come in here and you'll have this little settings gear under custom. And if we click this, you're going to be able to exclude specific funds, campaigns, appeals, include soft credits, just kind of depending on your organization and what you want to do with those things. But you can also change the state range to be fiscal year or calendar year or things like that if you want to look at something other than a rolling year. But the best part of this wheel, and I feel like it's kind of a hidden secret a little bit, but on this wheel itself, you'll see the darker shade and the lighter shade. The darker shade is going to represent those who have been retained. The lighter shade is going to represent those who we consider to be lapsed based on the parameters set either by the custom wheel or the default. But these are clickable. So if you click on this and open it up, boom, there's a report. These are who we consider to be lapsed. So this is a quick and easy way to come in, take a look as soon as you log in to see who's considered lapsed based on the wheel's perspective at this time. That being said, too, you can utilize this as a template. So if you wanted to come in and change any of these metrics that we're looking at from the wheel's perspective, you could then save this report and reference this later on from the reporting area. Just know it doesn't affect the wheel. On the dashboard, currently that is going to be whatever the metrics are based on the customization or the defaults. But for your organization's sake, these reports are completely editable, and then you can save them and reference them later on if you have your own specific parameters. And again, too, you're going to also be able to click on the darker section to see who has been retained. Maybe you make another touch point with these people. Maybe you have a board member call them, that sort of thing. Awesome. All right, let's now look at first-time donors. So from this perspective, we do have a template as well. So if we go into our reports list and click new, if you haven't been in this area, I highly recommend after this call, you immediately go here and take a look at what we've got going on. But if you click on start from a template, you're going to see we have a slew of different templates here that can get you started from a reporting perspective. And especially these first 6, these were introduced during COVID. So they're great fundraising tools to help you kind of hone in on some specific areas of your database from a donor perspective. But we're going to look now at newest donors. So from this perspective, if I click here, this report is going to show me by household. So that means it's going to include households, individuals not in a household, and organizations. And we're also filtering by type as individual. But again, this is a template. So if you wanted to include organizations in this, just click out of this. Boom, you've got your organizations and individuals and households. So this filter, though, here is actually looking at the first transaction is in the previous 90 days or today. That being said, if you have a different date range, by all means, add in a different date range for your organization. But what's really cool, so actually I'm going to do that. Let's look at it from a weekly perspective or a monthly perspective, excuse me. Date is during, let's do this month. And notice I'm choosing during this month. This is a dynamic date filter. So if you utilize the during and then one of the options here, it's going to be dynamic in the fact that next month in July, it's going to start looking at July. And then in August, it'll start looking at August, things like that. So if I click OK, I've got 13 households found. I'm going to look at their first transaction date, their first transaction amount. Do they have a first-time donor call? The relationships, if there's any relationships for these people, and number of interactions. You can always add in additional columns, remove some of these columns if you don't find them useful, but really what it's going to do is it's going to give you that holistic view of their first-time donor experience thus far. So if I go to save and schedule report, I do have to name it first, so one moment. I could now schedule this report as well to be monthly on, let's do the end of the month since we did this month, or last day. We can choose last day. And then maybe say, let's do maybe 4 o'clock. That way the next day I will be able to look at it. Recipients wise, I could then add in specifically any user from Bloomerang, but it doesn't have to be a user. If you have a board member that isn't a user or a volunteer that you need to have maybe write a handwritten note for the first-time donor, you could enter in their email here, enter in a subject, enter in the content. If there's no results, don't send an email. I highly recommend this just so you don't get a random email with nothing in it. But if you save and schedule this report, immediately we're going to then send a Excel file to the emails of the recipients at this scheduled time so that you have that data in your inbox. You don't need to log into Bloomerang to actually get this data, and then you can take action. And again, maybe this again is for a handwritten note for those who are first-time donor this month. It's just another touch point on that onboarding plan that you have. Boom, quick and easy. All right, so let's take a look at another report here. Again, it's a template, so that's fantastic news. You don't have to go in and build anything. And we'll talk about LiveBunt. I also want to mention we do have a SciBunt report, which is also some year, but unfortunately not this year. So far, I apologize. I don't remember the name of the person who asked the question. This also might be a good resource for you, especially because you said you had a lot of lapsed donors, but taking a look at both these reports to start. But we're going to focus on LiveBunt. So from this perspective, what we're doing is, again, we're looking at households where they have a specific transaction that's a revenue transaction. And in Bloomerang, revenue is donations, recurring donation payments, and pledge payments, so cash in hand. And they made this revenue transaction in the last fiscal year. So that's building the list of people who have given last fiscal year. And what we're going to also do is we're going to exclude anyone from that list who gave a revenue transaction this fiscal year. So it should only be pulling in those who gave it last fiscal year and making sure that this list doesn't include anyone who has given this fiscal year. Again, the name gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. So of course, too, you can also change that year to be a different year, calendar year, things of that nature. But the report itself just starts with fiscal year. So again, here's my 21 people who are considered to be LiveBunt. So their latest transaction date, latest transaction amount, their total giving last fiscal year, as well as interactions this fiscal year so far. Cool. All right, so one last report, donor value. So donor value in general is really going to be kind of up to your organization. I'm going to look at average gift size because I think it's one of the more underutilized ones, but you could look at cumulative giving, you could look at whatever from your perspective. But really what you're doing is you're using the has transactions filter that you've seen within these templates that we've been looking at to kind of build out your list. So from this perspective, again, we have it set to households. And if we scroll down right now, I'm just pulling in anyone who has a transaction. So doesn't matter what that transaction is, they're just going to get pulled into this list. If I scroll down, I'm going to see here, I've also included columns for lifetime revenue, lifetime average, which you can build with a has transactions column. You would just change number to average, and then you can select revenue. You can build it out to be more for a specific date range if you'd like. But right now I have it set for all transactions, meaning lifetime. And number of revenue transactions, again, using the has transactions column, I've been able to show specifically how many revenue gifts they've given, their largest transaction amount, and largest transaction date. So again, you can always add in more details from a columns perspective, but this is kind of there to get you started. And I actually built this report. Unfortunately, this one isn't a template at this time, but I built this report before this just to kind of give you guys a sense of things to look at. So this is a great report just to kind of get an overall sense of where your donors stand. But we've talked about list segmentation a lot. And one of the things you could do is you could actually change this report or this filter to be, instead of has any, the calculated. And this filter can give you a whole bunch of information, really allow you to kind of hone in on your donors. When you keep it at some, that's going to look at cumulative giving. So that's going to allow you to say they've given a total of, maybe 1,000 or more transactions in their lifetime. So looking at multiple transactions, but those revenue transactions then add up to be 1,000. But if I change this to average, it's also going to look at their average gift size. So maybe I want to say their average revenue gift size is between $250 and $500, and we'll do that from a lifetime perspective. Maybe I consider this to be mid-size or, maybe like a kind of higher mid-size donor. If I click OK, this is now going to give me 45 households that fit this range. But what's great about this filter is as more data comes into your database, if someone else either meets this or falls out of it, this list is going to stay dynamic. So it's going to continually update based on the parameters you've set. So you could save this report as, mid-sized donors list, but you can take it then a step further. And from this perspective, we could then, let me save it here quick. We could then go into an email and build out an email communication that is specific to this segment. And if I go under filter, include is in a constituent report, all I have to do is find that report I built and reference it. And immediately we're going to get those people from that report in this list. So you're connecting the report to the email. You don't have to rebuild out those filters. You don't have to think it through again. It's just here for you. And now you can send out this email to those participants. Another thing to think about is building this out for your major gift prospects or major donors, and using this as an exclude as well. If you use it as an exclude, you're going to then say, I don't want these people receiving this. We're doing one-on-one communications. So just thinking through those things down the road. All right, let's take a look at some financial metrics. So address the elephant in the room. No one likes to talk about finances, but analyze where your money is going and how much is coming in. Sit down with the CFO or an accountant to get a big picture understanding of your organization's financials, current and historical. So think about how you're spending and how your fundraising efforts are impacting your larger financial situation. So there's two metrics we're going to look at. The first one being ROI, so return on investment, and that flips both ways. So ROI on your organization's fundraising efforts, as well as the donor's ROI. So look at the ROI of your fundraising efforts, but also look at the program's ROI and communicate impact with donors. How did your donors' contributions impact your organization? Invest the right amount for each type of donor. But this doesn't mean that you aren't giving them the attention they deserve, but review your resources and costs for the different donor levels, like we just talked about with that list segmentation. So kind of pairing specifically, hey, this size donor, really we should be spending about X much to try to retain them, things of that nature. And the other one we're going to look at too is projected revenue. So don't just sit around hoping that a gift's going to come in. Set yourself up to know that money is constantly coming in down the road. Open up those pipelines for future and consistent income. And there's really two main parts that we're going to look at when we talk about projected revenue. And that's going to be recurring gifts and pledges. So starting with recurring gifts, they can really remove a barrier to entry for more consistent donations. And allowing your donor to set up a recurring gift at a lower amount rather than giving a larger one-time donation allows them to constantly help your organization make an impact to your organization without breaking their budget. And it also allows them to kind of set it and forget it. So they can, just know that they're giving. They don't have to worry about it. It's happening. And this in turn is also going to provide your organization a constant source of revenue, unless of course the donor decides to cancel or there's issues with the method of payment. But you can, for the most part, count on these gifts to come in and help sustain your mission. So we just did an entire Academy series on recurring gifts, and I would highly recommend going back and watching these classes. They can walk you through the benefits on how to set up a recurring gifts program. And I think there's 3 in the series. So definitely check those out. Pledges are actually going to allow the donor to promise to your organization a larger sum of money, but then be able to pay off that promise in installments. So not burdening them with having to come up with this lump sum right away. So it's going to also then in turn have a sense of how much money you have fundraised. And I'll explain why I do that in a second. And again, you can count on these gifts to come in the future and sustain your mission. So ideally, and if it's okay with the donor, this is just kind of another point to make, set both of these types of gifts up to be auto-process. Otherwise, be sure to follow up with any open schedules and reminder communications. But also in Bloomerang, if the recurring donation schedule or pledge is set up with auto-processing and there's an issue with that process payment, we will inform you and we're going to encourage you to take immediate action to rectify the situation. We also just released our own payment processor, Bloomerang Payments, if you guys weren't aware. That does have the ability to update expired credit cards, assuming the card allows it. That's kind of one caveat. But this should also help you to keep that pipeline open. Again, just kind of setting it and forgetting it, making sure it's just rolling in. So let's take a look at these 2 reports in Bloomerang. We're going to start with ROI. Leave. There we go. So from an ROI perspective, right now what I'm filtering for is just transactions this year. Again, dynamic. So as more come in throughout the year, more transactions will be added to this list. But from this financial report, I've pulled in a revenue amount column. So again, we've talked about revenue is cash on hand, donations, recurring donation payments, pledge payments. Raised, however, this is where I get to do my fun fundraise thing, Raise is going to be what you've gone out and fundraised. So talking about those pledges in full, plus recurring donation payments and donations. So it's going to give you that better sense of potentially what's coming down the pipeline from that realm. But I've also included the fund, campaign, and appeal for these gifts. What's great about a Bloomerang report, and this goes for any column in a Bloomerang report, but especially when you're in a transaction-based report, this is super, super helpful. If you click on, for example, appeal, maybe we want to look at year over year how our appeals are doing. If I click here and group by this column, it's now going to show me each appeal, what I've made in revenue, what I've made raised, and the actual appeal itself. And again, all that additional information here. But I can take this a step further. Maybe I don't care about the individual transactions. I just want to see appeal over appeal. If I collapse this group to one row, now I've got that. I've got the ability to see specifically just each specific appeal and what they've done from a revenue perspective and a raise perspective side by side. So pretty neat. What's also great too, so again, we're looking at this year. If I save this and export to Excel, I can then have this data specifically in Excel. And if I come back into this report using it kind of like a template, I could come in here, maybe change this to last year. There it is. And now I've got my last year data here. I could then again go ahead, save, export to Excel, side-by-side comparison, take a look, kind of see where we stood year over year. Awesome. All right, let's take a look at projected revenue. We do have a template for this one, so this is great to get you guys started. We scroll down to the bottom, here's projected cash flow. So right now what we're filtering for is any projected revenue this fiscal year. Again, completely editable if you'd like to make it a different time frame. One of the things I would potentially recommend is if we actually click on this during, change it to between, this is going to allow you to enter in a date range. So you could look at, let's do we'll do 21 to 12/31/2026. Math is hard. So this is now going to give me projected revenue for the next 5 years. Pretty quick and easy. If we click OK, it's going to show me, again, recurring donation schedules or pledges that have some sort of revenue coming in the next 5 years. Right now, this report also includes a projected revenue column for this fiscal year. So again, maybe you come in here and you change this between, look at it for that next 5 years, or maybe you build out 5 individual columns for each year. Just kind of depends on how you need to see the data. We can also have columns for year-to-date pledge payments, just to show us specifically what has been brought in from a fiscal year perspective, or again, your date range specifically. So that way you have a good understanding of what's come in so far. And again, you can do that for either pledge payments or recurring donation payments as well. So another thing to think about when it comes to projected revenue is also potentially looking in the future, or in the past, excuse me. I know it's a little counterintuitive, but with a projected revenue, let's say during last year, that's going to then give you a sense potentially of, okay, we were projecting X amount last year at this time. What did we bring in? So looking at that year-to-date pledge payment and recurring donation payments, we would need to come in and change these columns to be last year as well to get real results. But getting that information as to what you received last year versus what you projected, maybe it was $100,000 you projected, you only received $80,000. Maybe take that 20% gap and apply it to this year's projected revenue. So that way you can say, hey, last year we only collected 80%. Let's kind of take that number down about 20% for this fiscal year. That way we know, hey, we're kind of budgeting appropriately from that perspective, just kind of giving you that cushion. So kind of a few different ways you can look at it, but it's super important from a budgeting perspective and just knowing what's coming in down the road. Any questions? Probably about one question probably at this point, Diana.
Thanks, Jenna. I might be in the minority of loving all the numbers and
sorry, guys.
That's okay. We had a comment here about sometimes there's really sensitive information that you don't want to necessarily send in those reports. Mm-hmm. How do you control what's sent in that Excel file?
So from that perspective, it would just be based on whatever is in that report at that time. But you do have the option It does limit it to who can actually access it, which in your case might be what you need. But if we go to save and schedule reports, just type in some gibberish here. You can also require a Bloomerang login. So again, you've trusted people to utilize Bloomerang. I would assume that this would be okay, but this would then send them a link to Bloomerang to say, hey, go log in. They'll take them into that report immediately when they log in from that link. So that might be your better option depending on the type of report. It is an option available, but really what's nice about being able to just send them the Excel file again is to take immediate action. So that too, if really also from like maybe you're pulling in first-time donors, you don't want to include the amount or things like that, but you just need to include like their address. If you're sending a thank you note, maybe you just do a report that just has their name and address, and that report goes out. They don't know what's being filtered by, things like that. They just see that general information that they need. So just kind of thinking through what's needed from a data perspective in order to accomplish the task.
Wonderful. That's a great point. You can always control what columns you have in the report and what information people can see. Also, we have new user permissions now. So if you've been hesitant about allowing people access to your Bloomerang database, you can set a couple more permissions in there.
Absolutely.
And we have a comment here from Christy. So if your board is interested in seeing reports, but does not want to be conversant in Bloomerang, is this the perfect way to do it?
They don't want to receive reports. Oh, sorry.
They want to receive reports, but don't necessarily want to be in Bloomerang and learning Bloomerang. Yes.
This is the perfect use case for scheduled reports. Absolutely. Because again, you don't have to have, like, we give you the list of options for users, but they don't have to be a user. You can type in any email address.
Absolutely. And we had a question here on how to generate the ROI report. We'll send instructions on which report templates we started with and how to customize it for your purpose.
Yeah,
Thanks,
absolutely.
Jenna.
Cool. All right. So one last question. This is rhetorical. There won't be a poll or you don't need to chat it in. And I don't mean to be morbid, but what if you or someone else got hit by a bus? So remember, there's high turnover in nonprofit world. But also too, just thinking from a shorter term perspective, if someone gets COVID-19, like we just experienced and is out for 2 weeks, or maybe there's a death in the family, or someone goes on vacation, just be prepared. Write the important organizational policies, procedures, and plans down. So where do you start? Well, in Bloomerang, and if you're a Bloomerang customer, I would highly encourage you to take a look at the progress report of your sustainability scorecard. So that's located on the dashboard. This progress report is going to be based off your fiscal year that's set in your organization settings. It's measured quarterly, but there's going to be 16 items for you to keep track of. I'm showing you the first 9 in this screenshot. But even if you're not accomplishing all of these tasks, they should really hopefully help you get thinking and to prioritize some of these tasks and allow you to track your progress over time. So some of the elements, you can see them on this screen, but some of the elements are going to include, did you fully utilize a strategic plan, a succession plan, fundraising plan, marketing, communications plan? Do you have job descriptions, just to name a few? It's going to talk about measuring and communicating your impact, as well as looking at how key stakeholders in your organization are participating with their time, talent, and treasures. One thing that's not included in the sustainability scorecard, but while we're talking about writing things down, do not forget to write down your database policies and procedures, making sure that those who are able to access and edit data know how to appropriately track that data and any workflows that happen in your database, whether that's running acknowledgement letters or sending out emails, things like that, making sure you have those procedures in place. So again, if someone leaves, someone can pick it up immediately. And that being said too, we do have free templates on the Bloomerang website for any nonprofit. You don't have to be a Bloomerang customer for the majority of these items. And I would highly encourage you to take a look and download some of them to help you get started. It'll be linked at the end of the slide presentation, but if you go to bloomerang.com, under the resources tab, select templates. So let's focus on one of these specific items, and that's your strategic plan and setting goals for your organization. So what future do you want to create? Know your goals and recognize obstacles that could stand in your way. Make sure that your goals are outcome driven. And your strategic plan is not just a business plan. This is setting the direction and vision of your organization. Involve your stakeholders, board, staff, volunteers, et cetera. but especially be sure to engage your board and staff in executing these goals. Assign them a role, give them responsibility, hold them accountable by creating action steps and assignments. And be sure to update and reevaluate your strategic plan annually. Just know too, again, with the sustainability scorecard, we do have the ability to check in quarterly, allowing you to focus on your top 3 priorities and your top 3 organizational challenges for your strategic plan that quarter. And contingency planning. So these stats are pretty alarming, but the National Council of Nonprofits stated that for 7 consecutive years, their nonprofit finance fund's State of the Sector report revealed that less than 25% of those nonprofits responding had more than 6 months of cash in reserve. A majority of the nonprofits responding reported that they had less than 3 months of operating reserves on hand. Close to 10% had less than 30 days of cash on hand. So plan for a rainy day, or heck, a global pandemic like we just experienced. If COVID has taught us anything, it's that life is unpredictable. So plan for the worst and hope for the best. And this kind of goes hand in hand with considering endowments, major gifts, plan giving, kind of working in that into your fundraising plan to help you enable projects and allow you to save some of those unrestricted sustaining gifts for your rainy days and your global pandemics, hopefully never again. The key to this type of fundraising, though, in regards to major gifts, plans, gifts, things like that, is making sure that you place donors into the right portfolios. So again, talking about that list segmentation we did earlier, and understanding their capacities and trying to deepen that relationship appropriately. So I would highly recommend checking out our Major Gifts and Plan Giving Academy classes for more information on this subject after this session. But that being said, next steps, final questions. Review your current efforts is going to be my first thing for next steps. Again, just see where you are, just get a sense, no judgment. Meet as an organization and set those goals. And then finally, set up your sustainability scorecard, any of those reports, the documentation you need as an organization. And really, that's kind of where we stand. So again, we have some resources here that are listed, and we will be sending out this presentation. And like Diana said, I will also write up instructions on how to build the reports that I did. Consultant directory, I mentioned this earlier, but we do have on our website under resources a whole list of consultants for any aspect of the nonprofit world that we trust and we would recommend to you if you do need help moving in the next steps. And of course, our Bloomerang knowledge base and support portal. Do not hesitate to reach out to support if you need assistance, especially when building reports or just kind of working in your database day to day. The knowledge base as well, of course, is a great resource and it's available 24/7. And again, we do have some resources directly from our knowledge base if you're a Bloomerang customer to get you started on some of the things I talked about today as well. But last but not least, I am the training manager, so this is a little bit of a shameless plug, but if you guys want to get a better sense of where you stand quarterly, we also offer something called quarterly assessments. It's part of our consulting services. And Die Cox, if you've seen her, she's our database consultant. So you'd be working with her in regards to really kind of looking at a holistic approach and helping your organization utilize your database for its primary intentions of donor retention and fundraising best practices. So really what you're going to get is you're going to meet with Di twice per quarter. And then you're going to sit down with her to look at, I don't even know how many metrics there are at this point in time, but there's about 30 reports she will build in your database, just with different aspects of fundraising and just kind of where you stand as an organization from some of the things that we talked about today. So you'll get 30 pre-built reports by her, and then you'll get to sit down with her quarterly just to look at these metrics and compare that to your goals to kind of figure out what's next steps. So if you're interested, Diana just threw up a poll to have someone reach out to you. But again, no pressure. I just have to do a shameless plug since I am the training manager. So.
Thank you so much, Jenna. That was a lot of great information. We still have about 5 minutes for any questions, so I'll leave the poll up as we have questions coming in. We have questions coming in about how much is this consulting?
It is $1,600 for the year. So again, you do get 2 sessions per quarter plus the reports and things like that. And each section technically costs $200 to work with the consultant. So you're technically, it's just kind of evening out for those 2 sessions, and the reports come free and the metrics and workbook come free from that too.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have another question here. I had sent out, someone had asked for how much contact you suggest after a first-time donor, and I sent over our new donor cultivation timeline.
Yes,
However,
beautiful.
do we have any recommendations, or do you have any recommendations on how to balance helping donors feel connected with your organization versus inundating them with too much of your cultivation initiatives?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say do some research and talk to someone more specific in like a communications role. But that being said, I would say really think about, especially from a first-time donor perspective, since that was brought up. If you haven't utilized the first-time donor calls, please do. It's just a smart way to have that extra touch point that's really personal and not just another email and not just another text message or things of that nature. So again, you get that first-time donor, you should still send them an acknowledgement. This is not an acknowledgement, but you should still send them an acknowledgement. That's a formal thing. Have that first-time donor call. And then again, too, kind of looking at the type of donor, things of that nature, maybe thinking through, are they a small donor? Are they a mid-sized donor? Like, what was the size of that gift? Are they a major donor? If they're a major donor, you really want to do more one-on-one type things. So you want to really kind of talk to them a little bit more personally. And maybe you ask them what makes the most sense. Like maybe you set up quarterly, maybe you set up monthly, maybe they're super engaged and they really want to be involved and they want to go monthly. But just kind of having check-ins from that perspective. But again, for those small donors and communications, I mean, I can't give you an exact number, and maybe this is you kind of play it by ear and test it a little bit. But that being said, just kind of thinking through, what should we be sending them and how often? I would probably do maybe monthly at the most, but especially too, if you have an event coming up, you're probably going to be sending a few additional things like that. So it just kind of depends on, hey, your fundraising plan, what size donor are they? There's a lot of parts and pieces.
Absolutely. And I guess this is more a question for everyone. Someone shared earlier, I've forgotten who now, but someone shared earlier that they include the donor bill of rights when they send a new donor welcome packet.
That's a brilliant idea.
Yes. And
I love this.
I know. Sorry. It's great. That's why I wanted to mention it to everyone as well. And we have a question that I'd like to put to the group. If you would like to share what else you include in your new donor welcome packet, please put it in the chat, or if people want to reach out to each other and you're open to people reaching out to you, you can put that in the chat as well. We have a question here from Christy. Is there a Bloomerang in-person learning camp as we come out of COVID?
So not in person. But that being said, we do have the coaching sessions that are more one-off type things. But also too, we are just kind of down the road looking at kind of ways to kind of educate you guys in a more long-term perspective. So just know that that's something that we're kind of trying to figure out what makes the most sense. So it's coming, I promise, because we know you guys want it. I always hear the words Bloomerang Boot Camp, and I'm like, okay. We'll figure out what that means, and we'll get back to you.
And once our office is fully open as well, I'm sure everyone is welcome to, even if it's just for a visit, even if
if you're in Indianapolis, once we're fully back in the office, by all means, come visit. We have great snacks.
Yes, we do. Awesome. We're right at about time. Any parting thoughts for our friends today, Jenna?
So I've given you a lot. Break it up into bite-sized pieces. Please know that you don't need to do all of this in one day. Start small and just find small ways to improve over time. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is a journey. So just find small ways you can improve each and every day and try to get better as an organization to help you long-term.
Wonderful. And as a reminder, everyone is going to get an email with a link to the recording, as well as the slides, which will have linked to all the resources that we shared with you today, as well as some additional resources that people have asked for throughout today's presentation. And thank you so much again for spending part of your day with us. We hope that this has been helpful for you. If you have suggestions for what other things you'd like to learn about, please let us know. And we hope to see you in another Academy class soon. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.